Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Deborah Jenkins, your host for Black Talk Platform. And this is our final show for 2020, and we are so happy to have you join us this week. I have my compadres, I have my partners in faith and justice here tonight. My first partner is Pastor Frank Jenkins, my husband. Smile for the people, honey. Smile, because you ain't smiling. So he's here with us tonight. My girl, we go back forever and forever, and faith intersects what we do, and justice intersects what we do. We have Chaplain Tandra Birkett tonight, and who has been probably my most frequent guest on this show since we began all the way back in May, is Pastor Anthony Davis. Because as senior pastors in the same community, one thing that we've both come to realize is that our ministries intersect in the way we go about it. And so I'm always happy to have him here. I'm happy to have this wonderful group of guests with us tonight. Tonight, we are trying to just spend the hour, but if we need to, we'll go a little longer because that's usually how it goes. But my husband already said it's an hour, right? Hey, Quadri. Look, Minister Quadri's hanging out with us because he's our people too. So we're happy to have you. Don't leave now, Quadri, because you already got me started earlier, and he knows what I'm talking about. But we're talking, we're as ministers of the gospel, we are looking at faith in review for 2020, and how 2020 has served our faith and the community's faith. Are we ready to move from chaos to community? And I like that book. That was Dr. King's last book. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Because quite frankly, it served me well during my dissertation. And I always think about it and I always go back to it. And so one of the quotes I like to share with you all tonight is, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And I like to think that the passion, the heat that Tandra brought in her program, Mental Health Mondays, over the summer and throughout the year, the discussions that Pastor Davis and other guests to Black Talk Platform and I have had since May, have spoken directly to that quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. And I know you all see me all the time. I am certainly the more vocal of the duo called Frank and Deborah, but he has some fire in him as well. Y'all think it's just me, it's not. But we're going to get into our discussion. I had promoted tonight's episode by reminding those who may have forgotten or tried to forget that the year began in a lot of different ways. It started with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Mm-hmm. And I put it in this order, Breonna Taylor, because Breonna Taylor was murdered prior to the murder of George Floyd, which brought everybody's eyes to the plight of the Black community here in these never united, but hopefully one day United States of America. And then, of course, COVID hit us. And it has affected not only those of us in the United States, but throughout the world even. And of course, how have we dealt with COVID while we were also dealing with the issues of injustice? Massive protest throughout the summer. And I'm able to smile about it because I've never seen such an uprising, a groundswell against the injustices visited upon Black people at the hands of white supremacy. And it made me happy. And Tandra had different expressions of it. She totally embraced the whole Black Lives Matter. It was the banner around which justice was fought in the streets. But we're not talking the organization of Black Lives Matter. We're talking about the moniker Black Lives Matter, because we're not going to let anyone tell us that our lives don't matter. And so therefore, we're talking about that. But we couldn't just have a show that we planned for a month and get out of it with only those names that I've lifted tonight. Because we know what happened in Indianapolis to Andre Hill. He was murdered. We also know that today, the Department of Justice decided not to charge the murdering cops of Tamir Rice. So we can't leave 2020 on an even keel of all is better, that we've progressed so far, that all of the protests mattered, because the reality is, and it was too soon for many of you watching, the day after the election, when I said, but we can't forget about the 70 million. Nobody wanted to talk about that. But I feel like in order to pursue justice, you cannot ever go to sleep. And now we have Andre Hill. And now Donald Trump's Justice Department continues to do what it does. And even as we speak on this platform, there are other things happening. And I did leave out one name that I want to insert here, Ernie Serrano, out in California. What they did to him on camera, how they beat this man mercilessly. And now they're trying to spin a narrative that, oh, he had drugs in his system. But if he had drugs in his system, he seemed to have been shopping. He seemed to have been okay before they beat him to death. And so for me, even though I was trying to stay like with the pressure, the temperature down, I realized that there is no rest for the freedom fighters. There's no rest. And so having said all of that, I want to welcome all of you tonight, and I want us to get right into it. Let me start with you, Tandra. Express some views about all of that or any of that.
Well, for me, just in reflection is, we can't stop fighting. I've said it many, many times on, as you've been a guest, on Mental Health Mondays, and appreciated your support throughout the summer. And I'm glad to be here this evening. I've quoted Dr. Amos Wilson, and I talked continuously about the progression and regression in history. And I love his analysis, and I use it all the time because, as you know, I'm also a historian, and I'm that by trade. And so as a historian, we look at, we study history. We study the different dynamics of history. And oftentimes what happens with the masses is they forget the historical account of the events. In Westernized society, we are taught that history is just linear and that things will eventually get better. That is literally what people believe. This is what, if we keep on going, it gets better. But what Dr. Wilson talks about in his book, The Falsification of the African Consciousness, is he has a section that I always, and I spent, even when I was teaching in the classroom, I taught my students about the progression and regression in history. And he did an analysis of this progression and regression. And he showed that, for example, after the Civil War, you had a progression for Black people. Insurmountable number of Black people became a part of became politicians. They became part of the elected officials. You saw an upsurge in the lifestyle of Black people. You saw this movement of Black people, after the Civil War, becoming better conditions. You saw their involvement. And then soon after this progression, what did you have? Regression, Jim Crow, segregation, lynching, Ku Klux Klan, and then you have the 100 years of segregation. Then what happens? We have civil rights movement, and then where we go? Progression, the lifestyle. The middle class of Black people develop. You have Black people had better living conditions, and then what did you have? Regression. Prison industrial complex that went on for 30, 40 years. And what do you have then? The election of Barack Obama. Progression, the ideology of a post-racial America. And then what do you have after that? The Trump. There's always a backlash that you have in the history of Black people in America that stops their progression, that stops this move forward, that unfortunately white supremacy is always ready on the ready to come and interject into the historical account of Black people to do whatever they can to push back the advancement that they've made. So we have to be very aware because the push is coming. The push is coming. We are going to high and just very excited. You know, we want to be with Joe Biden being president, thinking it's going to be changing, and we hoping there's a change that's coming, all that. And what happens is the masses of people become complacent. And while we're complacent, white supremacy is planning.
Yes.
Well, that's really what I see. So my thing about it is that we need to learn from history and not get caught under that same, idea of it just going to get better, because that's not really the truth of history. It is not just consistently gotten better, but there has been progression, regression. So my reflection on those things, that I'm glad, never glad that someone gets hurt, but you are glad that we stay aware. You don't glad that anybody is killed. You never want that to happen, but you always glad that we stay aware, we stay woke. And I think that's what, for me, is that we need to stay woke.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Pastor Frank, jump in there.
Well, I'm reminded of the old song that they used to sing during the civil rights movement. Those of us who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. But the problem is, even when it comes, we can't rest, because just as Sister Tandra has said, it just spoke so eloquently. Whenever you have that thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, there's always those who are looking to take us back before the thesis. You understand what I'm saying? So, in other words, if we're here today, and we make progression, and we make the arguments known, and we win that argument, and we come to a new understanding, a new consensus, there are always those who are plotting and planning to take us back beyond where we were when we started. It's just like I'm reminded of a sports analogy, there, because I just love sports, and I used to be, a really big boxing aficionado, and I don't know how many people remember the name Jack Johnson. But he was so good that he couldn't be denied, and he chased the white heavyweight champions for years until he finally caught up to a man named Tommy Burns, knocked him out, and then knocked out all comers. But the problem was, the boxing didn't just take off from there for Black folks. You didn't have once Jack Johnson was defeated. You didn't have another heavyweight champion for 25 years. 25 years until Joe Louis came along and won. And then he could only get a shot if he agreed to certain, stipulations, like never being photographed with a white woman, or never standing over his fallen opponents, things like that. So I've lost my light, y'all. But the point is, we can't rest. Those of us who believe in freedom cannot rest ever. We have to be forever vigilant. That is the price of freedom, is eternal vigilance. I'll leave it there until I can get myself together.
Okay, thank you. Pastor Davis, we want to hear from you as well.
Well, I think Tandra basically encapsulated everything as Frank said, eloquently. I think it's important, and I like the regression theme that we're working on, because I begin to think about some of the historical points that she was raising throughout history, and I think about World War I, right, and the aftermath of World War I, and how Black life began to thrive again, and of course in Tulsa and other places, and you have Black meccas developing, and of course in the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance. So shortly after World War I, Black intellectual life, economic life began to grow and evolve. And of course, then you had the Red Summer of 1919, that regression that she talks about, and all the things that happened in terms of the Rosewood being destroyed, and Tulsa, among other places, all these other things. So that you're always dealing with that. And we've talked about these themes in other shows. And it's just coming full circle that we have to remain vigilant. And I think that's the problem sometimes that we have, right? We tend to get a small respite or a small period of things seem okay, and we lose that vigilance, that fight. And I think what 2020 has taught me, and I hope it has taught all of us, that you can't stop. And when you reference these two latest things that have happened, and I think in California, I thought the other one may have been in Ohio. I'm not sure. In Ohio.
You're right. You're right.
You know, again, it's like, wow, we're here again. And sometimes you can be apathetic because I don't know if people are talking about it the way I would normally think they would. At least it's early. But again, people become tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
Tired, and they become numb, and they don't want to deal with it. And so they need placebos, they need things to entertainment and other things. And we can't fall into the trap of being entertained and being numb or self-medicating. You got to be in the fight. And so I think it's important to revisit this stuff as you're doing, Pastor Deb, and reignite us being who we are in our community.
Yeah.
Hey, we got to keep this thing moving.
We do. And I think it's not for everyone. I understand that. But here's the problem. There is an expectation that those of us, like the three of us specifically, right, that we will always be out front, out there on behalf of everyone else. People really don't believe that it takes a village. People really want to see those who keep their pressure up, who are always so upset, do the work that we should be doing collectively. And it's, I try not to deal with that aspect of it because we are clear about our own roles and our own calls. But we also know your show is called Mental Health Mondays.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that there is a time when we too have to step back. It's not that we don't see what's going on. It's not that we're not still doing and engaging in the fight for justice. It's just that where's everyone else? Where is everyone else? Is Andre Hill's life not important enough? Are we at a point where we look at Ernie Serrano and say, well, he's Latino, so that's not the same as a George Floyd. That's not the same as a Andre Hill, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, because he's Ernie Serrano. But I've said this often, I don't see that separation. I don't see that division. And it's not for me, to me, it's not for us to wait to be invited to rally around Serrano's family. It's for us to say, Mr. and Mrs. Serrano, where can we help you? How can we hold your shoulders up? You taught while you were working for the the Department of Education. You taught both Black and Latinos. You work in higher education where you teach or you are available to both Black and Latino. And I'm not bringing other groups in at this point because this is a Black Talk platform. We have members, and you have members of your faith community who are Latino. Why? It's like when God said to Job, should I not be concerned about 100 and how many 50,000 or 130,000 people in Nineveh? And so we have to stop with the separations that we artificially put into or interject into situations of injustice and say, come along, we can do this all together. And we will show them collectively where you're not going to continue to cause harm to Black and brown bodies. And I feel like we have to deal with that nonsense within in order to fight for justice. And time is well spent, far spent on having to address that type of issue when we are still being advanced against on every side. More recently, and to a lesser degree, Lower Manhattan, a Karen, right? She comes out of the elevator, a father and his 14-year-old son. They've already come into the lobby or whatever, some high, a very upscale hotel in Lower Manhattan. She sees this child with an iPhone. How many people have iPhones? I don't, but how many people have iPhones? She instantly assumes that this 14-year-old boy has her iPhone. She makes a big stink about it. And what happens with the hotel manager, who claims that he is trying to just settle the situation with calm and ease? But yet he reinforces her accusations against this 14-year-old to him and to his father. But she's demanding that this boy gives her his phone. She's insisting that he's taken her phone. And then she shoves the father, I believe. And you know, these are the type of things that I say you got to still remember the 70 plus million people who voted for hatred. Yes. Because that's what it was about. Can we be honest here? I mean, whether they think they're being hateful or not, Donald Trump represents hatred towards Black and brown people. And there's no getting around that. And so if that's happening in New York City, supposedly the melting pot of the country, we know that we can't afford to be quiet. So let's look back. I don't want to get off on too many diatribes or soliloquies. Let's look back to Ahmaud Arbery. Let's just think about Ahmaud Arbery for a moment. You know, there's so much evidence against these two men. But the first indictment has to be that they did not think that this Black man should be running through that community. Somebody, anybody, just jump in when I bring up these subjects. Just jump in where you feel comfortable.
Well, you know what, for me, in reflecting on what you were saying, Dr. Deb, is how do we re-strategize? Because these situations have been happening now for centuries. They're just various forms of the same thing. You know what I mean? Is if you really look at it, the problem is that we've been responding to them relatively the same. You know what I mean? We've been responding to the cycles, you know, violence against Black people relatively the same. They've morphed into different, but conceptually it's really the same thing. So we have to, and we talked about this previously about having a think tank. We have to really come to some different strategy. We can look at what was done in the past that worked, and then define what didn't work. And ask ourselves, why are we repeating the same thing? And then begin to create new strategies to deal with what it is that we're facing. And I think that's part of the thing. We haven't taken enough time. We're repeating the same thing over and over and over again. So we have to really look at it and say, and recognize what is it that is within our power as Black people to change. Because there's some things that we don't have the power over the white mind of the white supremacists. There was an ideology that we could change their mind. Like you said, the 70 million. It was an idea that we spent a lot of time trying to make them think differently about Black people. We put a lot of energy trying to make them think differently of Black people. But is that necessarily the best strategy? Did we spend that level of time on what we need to do to empower Black people? Because under the civil rights movement, integration, there was a lot of time spent, a lot of money and a lot of energy spent trying to make people make white supremacists think that Black people were the same. Trying to get them to love us, trying to get them to accept us, trying to get them to treat us like equals. But we didn't really spend a lot of time investing into the Black community. We really didn't. Right. So as we look at new strategies and new perspectives, maybe we need to spend some energy in educating, elevating the economic situation, the political dynamics of the Black community, and work on that as a different dynamic. And really spend time on what we can do in those areas, then we are trying to keep reminding people that hate us to love us. I mean, I'm getting kind of tired of that. Please love me. Please love me. I want you to love me. Please love me. You know, please recognize me. That's between that. Please recognize me. You know, please show me that I'm okay. Please please treat me that. No, I'm not trying to continue to validate myself by your standard.
Thank you.
And
Excellent.
decide who I am because you decided to say that I'm beautiful, or you decided to say that I'm talented, or you decided to say that I was intelligent. I don't want to be held accountable to your standard. And that's what we've been doing. Every time they acknowledge us, that's supposed to be a high level of recognition. We realize that, you know, it's good and it's great, but that's not the pinnacle. We need to redefine our thinking in the Black community so that you spend more time on being very strategic about Black empowerment.
Oh, love it. You know, I agree with every word you said. And I see Pastor Davis is chomping at the bit, but let me just give you some comments from the comments. Bingus, my friend who is always on this show, thank you, brother. He wanted us to know that the hotel is in Soho that I was referring to, and that the hotel gave a meek apology. And of course, they need to be exposed for the way they handled the matter, because really what the manager should have done was say, ma'am, you need to calm down. This is a guest also. If you'd like to, call the police, but we're not going to disrespect one guest for the sake of another who has absolutely no proof that the other guest stole from you. But he didn't do it like that. And then he wanted to try to validate himself by saying, I'm trying to work this out. No, you weren't. You sided with her in her frantic hysteria. And she was lying. And so, you know, they Benjamin Crump, I put the petition on my wall yesterday. They are trying to get Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance to bring charges against her because Black men get killed when white women lie on them. Do I have to remind everybody here about Carolyn Bryant, who is still breathing life while Emmett Till is dead and gone? I don't forget. And if the church has taught us that we're supposed to forget, that is not biblical. That is not the same as forgiving. But I'm not trying to go there tonight. Let me let the men jump on in there. You know, I mean, I'm getting uptight. But with the think tank, before you go, Pastor, I want people Quadri's age also. And that's something for us to deal with, because we, as progressive as our age group is, please, they're on steroids, you know, and we have to find a place for them. And it's not, I'm only saying that because he's here. I'm using his name, but there are others who are not even as progressive as he is. And he and I don't always agree, but I've always told him I'm always going to try to support you. And because we have to start seeing, when you talk about re-strategizing, Tandra, you are absolutely right. You should have written that down. And after the men go, I would love for you to go back to what we were talking about in regards to Stokely Carmichael and Dr. King, to put a little, put an end note on that piece. Go ahead, Pastor Davis, and then Pastor Frank, if you'd like to say something too.
Yeah, I think Tandra has set the right stage for a lot of the conversation. And I think, again, the strategies, and you were talking, Pastor Deb, about really the way Black folks think and creating a plan. And I think some of that includes, when we talk about ministry and what we preach and how we preach and things of that nature, and the tone of our message and the content of our message. And I think that I've said to you in other shows that I think that the Black church far too often embraces theology that is grounded in white supremacy, right?
Yes.
I think a lot of it needs to be, we need to have it expunged from us, right? So in 2020, right, we've seen the white evangelical heroes, right, heroes of their faith, basically fall from grace with a lot of inappropriate behavior. We've seen that even with the late great Ravi Zacharias, who is world renowned as a Christian apologist, and he's been held up in high esteem by many white evangelicals. And he also had a sort of a conservative slant in the way he viewed things politically. And I enjoyed his ministry. I'm not trying to say anything disparaging about him, but the reality is that he engaged in a lot of inappropriate behavior with women, right? Where he used women. And then there were other white evangelicals that we've seen in 2020 who got caught out there in the same type of behavior, abusive or very a lot of sexual behavior towards women. And so what you begin to realize is that the people or the types of ministries or the people who give us our theology, we see that they're very flawed and it's not working. And so I was reading an article and I posted something on Facebook today that these celebrity preachers, these celebrity evangelicals, we put them too high up. And what America needs is to hear less and less from popular celebrities, right? But from more courageous prophetic voices, right?
Yes, yes.
People who boldly seek justice and call us to turn individually and institutionally from sin. So I do believe that God has allowed these things to happen, where we can see that a lot of the stuff that we put so much stock in is not necessarily working, it's not necessarily right. And so Black folk need to have a paradigm shift in the way we think theologically and go back to where we started from, which is being prophetic, which is being the more conscious of the country, and preaching in such a way to our congregations where we elevate their consciousness. I know that we're tired sometimes, Pastor Deb, that we're the ones always running to do certain things. And it's primarily because we're not really giving the people on a whole as the Black church what they need, right? Giving them the messages that they need and the inspiration that they need and the information that they need to be able to now carry that torch, or we can pass the baton to them to begin to become the kind of leaders that we're talking about. So that's part of the planning or strategies that we have to look at. This as an opportunity. These people who we've put on such a pedestal, so many of these white evangelicals or the white evangelical heroes, they've fallen, it's not working. We need to go back to the type of justice preaching and justice living and behind the pulpit and go back to really what was the really bedrock of our theology is that God delivers from bondage, God delivers from slavery, God liberates his people. We need to make that as part of our preaching or prophetic thrust in everything we do behind the pulpit. And I think that's part of, again, the strategy to move people forward. And I think that the general population has become skeptical of church because we've lost that. We're not dealing with the social issues. We're not dealing with the stuff, right? We're worried about, defending our position as opposed to defending people.
Yes, yes. Just before you speak, Pastor Frank, Quadri, oh my goodness, this is he's just listening to you, Pastor Davis, and he raises this point. He says, excellent comments, Pastor Davis. At what point does it become appropriate to place our Black identity before our Christian identity? I love it, Quadri. He says, I think to some degree, Jesus's ministry places his identity as a poor person over his formal religious identity in a traditional sense. And you're absolutely right. I agree with you, Quadri. And he identified with the downtrodden Jews of that day because Rome was advancing and using other Jews to beat down the poor among them. And I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, because I will never give up the term Christian. I've said that before, and I've said it publicly, and I say it often. Well, I don't say it as often anymore. But Christianity, going back to what Pastor Davis said, is something that and our theological benchmarks are from a white European perspective, and ultimately has Black people, the church, reinforcing white supremacy within the community of Blackness, so that sometimes we cannot even clearly identify ourselves as Blacks. And that's a problem for us, because it doesn't matter about the things that this society tells us that we should be concerned about. Because the reality is, those things those little wedge issues that they want us to focus on, they don't matter when we come under attack. They only see a black man. They only see a black woman. They don't know anything about our medical history. They don't know anything about our home lives. They see blackness and they harm us. And that is why we have to unify around blackness without apology. So I appreciate that comment. I don't know if you wanted to say something back to that before Pastor Frank says something, Pastor Davis.
No, I think Catherine's right. I think that's really the point I'm making, is that we have to really be willing to identify, and that's really what the Bible is all about. We talked about this in prior shows, that the least of these, or identifying with those who are struggling, or those who who don't have justice, right? So we don't do these things. So we're more interested in our individual faith, right? And what does that give us in our individual life? So we don't care about the community. But the whole point of the body, as we talk about, is that we're a community that takes care of each other. That's the whole thing. When you look at, I think it's Acts chapter 6, they took care of the widows, right? And there was a daily distribution of food, right? And then even within that context, there was discrimination, because the Greek-speaking Jews were neglected by the Hebrew-speaking Jews. Like, there was even within that, there was some racial issues, right? But what happened was that people failed to deal with it, right, in that very moment, and it had an opportunity to perpetuate. But when you see injustice, even at the table, right, between two groups, you got to deal with it right then and there. That's the community part. We have to resolve it, solve it, and make sure that we see each other as equals. But that's the job of the church, to see these things. And even the apostles in that chapter 6, they didn't see it. They didn't take care of it. They were too busy. Oh, I have to preach.
Yeah.
Pray. You guys take care of it. No, leadership has to always be mindful of any injustice, even among widows who was being neglected. Don't leave it to somebody else. Get down in there and
deal with
fix
it.
And
That's
deal
right.
with it, right?
Yep.
And that's our job.
That.
Our job is to be the example, to preach, to proclaim, and to share, and to live and be that example.
Thank you. Thank you. Pastor Frank, you want to jump in there?
Yes, I want to get back to Quadri's point in just a moment, but I watch a lot of sports, and a lot of times when you watch sports, you can't help but watch the commercials, because you watch sports live most of the time. Otherwise, I don't watch any commercials, because I know what they're trying to do, what their agenda is. But there's a commercial out now. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but I think it's for Match.com or one of those other dating sites. And this guy who's dressed up, with red skin and giant horns come out of his head. It's the stereotypical picture or ideal of the devil. And he comes over and he walks up and he says, 2020. And the girl says, oh, just call me 2020. And so what the commercial is saying is the devil and the year 2020 are the perfect match. And so, because 2020, it seems like that's what it's been, the devil all the time. Everywhere you turn, it seems like it's just 2020 has been the devil all the time. But I say that to say this: we have been victims of a very marked and precise marketing strategy in this country for at least 100 years, at least. I mean, when you look at when you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's really just a propaganda rag. Because what they're trying to say is, we are going to go up here and raise arms against the government that helped us fight these two wars over the last 50 years because we don't want to pay taxes. But we got to find a way to justify it so that whether we win or lose, history will say, oh, well, they had a righteous purpose. And so I believe that here, even in the church, we've got into so many different types of doctrines that reflect the white supremacy of Calvinism, that says if you're rich, that means God has blessed you. That means you must be in God's favor. Never mind the fact that you could have stole everything you got, or you could have exploited people in order to get your riches. They don't talk about that. But we have to remember that this is a marketing strategy that is designed to keep everyone focused away from the biblical imperative, as Pastor Tony was saying, to promote justice, right? What did they say? I believe it's Malachi. God has told you, oh humanity, what he expects of you, right? To love mercy, right? And finally, the last one he says is to promote justice and to walk humbly with your God. And so the imperative is always to promote justice. And I would say to Quadri's comment, where he talked about the fact that we need to unite as a people because, you know, we're all catching it. I don't know if I can say the word I want to say on your program, Pastor.
Sure, of course you can.
You know, I don't want to drag it into the gutters. But
no,
but Malcolm X once said, you know, we catch hell whether we're Presbyterian or whether we're Baptist or whether we're Protestant or Baptist or Catholic. We catch hell not because we're any of those things, but because we are Black.
And he
said we need to learn how to leave our religion in the closet. And when we come out here, we present a united front.
Right.
So that people understand, I'm not going to allow for you to do to anyone else what I wouldn't want you to do to me. And that is the real definition of justice. People conflate justice with revenge. But that's not what justice or biblical justice is talking about. It's talking about it's a fundamental fairness that says I will not allow for anyone else what I would not want for myself or my loved ones.
Yeah.
That's what justice is. And if everyone moves towards justice, then how can we harm each other? How can we do anything if we always want the best for others, if we always want what we want for ourselves? And you know, Martin Luther King, and I'll stop here. Martin Luther King said one other thing. He understood the power of the law, just as Thurgood Marshall did before him. And that he said once that the law can't force my neighbor to love me. But the law can make it so that my neighbor cannot express his hatred against me.
Yep.
Now that's a rough quotation there, but the point is, we all must seek, if we're going to live in this country, and we're going to pay these taxes, and we're going to be a part of this society, we have to demand that the law treats us with equal protection.
Absolutely. So Quadri is funny. Y'all know I think of him as a nephew, right? Because I love his mama so much. And I remember when she was carrying him. But he's a funny guy. But he said, you're spitting straight facts. I know Tandra might understand that language, that slang. I don't know about you guys, but I try to keep up with the young'uns. Let me get back to Bingus's comment up here, and it really speaks to what you just ended on, Frank. He says, excellent point from Pastor Davis, from what you said before, Pastor Davis, and what he is saying worked well at the peak of the civil rights movement, when good leadership was around to make sure Black issues were at the forefront. Unfortunately, the leadership is not there anymore. I think we need to address that, because I don't disagree with him. What I see a lot, even as recent as the conversations that Joseph Biden, president-elect, had with civil rights leaders. First of all, are we to assume that Rashid, what's his name, Frank, from Color of Change? Rashid, somebody help me out.
Wallace.
What is it? Wallace. Is it Wallace?
I believe it is.
I believe so.
Yeah, Rashid Wallace. Are you telling me that Color of Change is not a civil rights organization, and that it shouldn't have been at that table? You can only look to the Urban League, the NAACP, both of which are waning in its influence over the general Black populace. You have to bring in the Color of Change. You have to bring in what is it, Higher Heights, though, but I do think they're part of the transition team. But these sisters out here in Brooklyn, who have been a very integral part of elections for the last couple of a few years, right? You have to bring in Until Freedom. You have to bring in to a table of civil rights leaders voices from today, and not only from yesterday, just for analogy's sake. So it's not only the National Action Network, it's not only the New York, the National Urban League, and it's not only the NAACP. Why weren't the National Council of Negro Women represented? Why weren't 100 Black men represented? And so I said that to say, in terms of leadership, there needs to be some synergy around all of these groups that are often out front. And that's a failure of the continuity of what began during the civil rights movement. Tandra, can you share with us that contrast between Stokely Carmichael and Dr. King that you shared with me before the show? Because I think that also speaks to what Bingas is asking right now.
If I might, Dr. Deb, can I just go back to a comment that was made, because it kind of pricked me regarding Christian identity and Black identity, and then move forward. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay, because I want to push back a little bit on that, and the idea that I don't want to misquote the gentleman when he said maybe we should put our Black identity above the Christian identity. Is that what was said?
Before, he said, at what point does it become appropriate to place our Black identity before our Christian identity?
And I wanted to come back to that, because that will be, if that is not unpacked sufficiently, you will lose a lot of support by the Black masses of Black Christian masses, even though what was said is understood. If that is not unpacked sufficiently, because a lot of those Black Christians would have a serious problem with that quote. And they would not be able to, support, a movement or strategy that use that as a base of operations, that comment. And the reason why I said I understand what the person is saying, but I just want to say, I don't think that we have to use the terminology of before, because I think that what Pastor Davis is mentioning, and I agree wholeheartedly, and as you are a student of Black theology, within Christianity, it's not an and or, it's not a either or. Within Christianity, and the core of it, not what was co-opted by white supremacy, but within Christianity is the message of justice. And the message of justice for Black people. So I don't think the verbiage of when do we put our Blackness above our Christianity is necessarily healthy for the movement, because I don't think that that's what the core of what Christianity means, and what Jesus, as the oppressed one, identified with the issues of Black people. So if we talk about authentic, not the Christianity that was manipulated by white supremacy, that's different. One thing that Cone says is that when Black people left, when Black churches left, the white denominations, they took with them the white theology, which is what Pastor Davis was saying. So what we really need to do is understand and teach the people the core of what the authenticity of Jesus' message as the oppressed one, and the fact that he aligned himself with the needs of the masses. And that's really what Christianity is. So when we put Black identity in, an opposition to Christianity, we create a problem. So I don't think that that's something, I don't think that that's necessary. I think what you're putting Black identity in contrast with, or opposition to, white supremacist Christianity, white conservative Christianity, put it in contrast to that, that's different. But to merely say that when do we put our Blackness above our Christianity, those things are not in opposition. I just wanted to, because that kind of pricked me in there. And I think that strategically, that then you will have a problem with really a lot more time, literally time consuming, to get Black masses of Christians to follow the message, if that's what you're going to say, because it is not a before. It's not, I don't think that it has to be a before. I think it's the essence of Christianity where Blackness exists. And that's what Cone is saying in Black theology. So I just had to come back to that, because I felt that needed to be addressed.
Okay, so let me, before you go on, Quadri has responded, but he said Christian. Now, for me, I can separate for me as an individual. I can separate out Christianity from that of being a Christian. As I said, I will never stop calling myself a Christian because it's spoken of in the Bible. So, like you said, Tandra, I think the approach may need to have um, a strategy around it also, because I think it is important that we see ourselves as holy followers of Christ who are worthy of not just equal treatment, but that there be equity around everything having to do with Blackness. Now, I cannot speak for you, Quadri, and I don't know if it was about Christianity, because see, Christian, I do believe that whole, we were talking about on your show over the summer. I think that you are going to turn a bunch of people off if you just say, I'm Black, and you're speaking to the people in the church. But I think we need to actually address how we have been misled. And like Cone said, we did leave these white denominations, but we took a lot of the white supremacy with us. We need to start addressing that with the congregants, with the people, the Black people. And I know that there are different ways to get to it. But I love the fact that this pause even came up in this discussion tonight. Let me pause a minute and give some more shout outs. Quadri, we're waiting. He said, agreed again. That's the problem. You put in there twice that's the problem. You said, I know, and that's the problem. Treat me like I'm a child and tell me exactly what the problem is. I want to welcome my sister, who's often here, Juanita Presley, my cousin, Bonna Presley, Palmer, but also another one of my adopteds. I call them adopteds because I've seen them grow up in the church. Bridget Turner, who is Lady Bridget Turner, and she is a firehouse. So I want to hear more from you, Bridget. She's my pastor's baby daughter. She says, just Jesus, back to what you said, Frank, Jesus equals justice. That's what we're all saying. And we agree. Juanita said Jesus was and is Christ. Yeah, and so that's why Nita, that's why we have to talk about this thing. Like Tandra said, we have to push back on absolutisms. Is that what you mean, Tandra? I don't want to put words into anybody's mouth, but I do believe, and Pastor Davis, you were on the show when I was talking about we all need to get in a group. I think you were on the show too. I don't know who was on the show, but I know Pastor Davis was. We all need to get in a room, Black people. We need to get in a room, put down all our weapons, and come to the center and address our grievances. And a lot of it is going to be around language, because I hear you clearly, Tandra, saying, look, hold up now. If you say put Black before Christ, you're telling me in many ways that I'm now supposed to worship Blackness, because we do know that some of the members in our churches will see it that way instead of seeing the depth of what Quadri is really trying to say. Because I believe one of the things you're trying to say, Quadri, and you're free to tell us and make me right where I'm wrong, is that we often, as Black followers of Christ, don't even value the Blackness that the Most High God has given us as an honor and not a curse, that the world sees our Blackness as. And at what point do we peel away even the thoughts in our own minds around this said curse and embrace how perfectly God has made us in His image? And deal with it from that, and not be ashamed of our Blackness, not be apologetic about it. And you hit it really well before when you were saying you're exhausted from trying to get them who hate us to accept us. I think I was there before even Black Talk. I don't have time for that. And I understand, and I kept watching a lot of my friends in social media pleading with their white friends, come on, understand, listen to us, hear that. No, I don't have time for that. I'm not that person. I was not that person, never have been, because I don't feel that I need to be accepted by them. If any accepting needs to be done, they need to accept us, because they're the ones who keep telling us that we're not enough. but I don't need to accept them, and I don't need for them to accept me. And so that's a part of the discussion that we need to have. And I keep envisioning this whole big empty room where we come is there's no Vaseline. We need to come in that room with our shoes off, ain't no sneakers. Men ain't got nothing in their pockets. There's no throwdown session going here other than verbal. And I look forward to the time when we can all come together and do something like that. So now, Tandra, let me let you go back, because Quadri still, I don't know if he had to leave, but yes.
So
go on.
One of the things, and you were on the program, and this is part of my message as an educator, as well as how Christianity has been manipulated by white supremacy. That's one of the areas that I feel that we have to educate our people about, because they don't know, nor do they understand the origins of the fusion between white supremacy and Christianity, and how this has become a religion for those white supremacists. And how, I mean, it's unfortunate. This sounds crazy, but percentage-wise, those who are racist are more white Christians that are racist than they are white people. People don't understand that. The statistics will show you that the higher percentage of racist whites are actually Christians. That is the percentage. And the research, which that's part of what I'm going to be teaching about, is actually more because their Christianity has been so manipulated by white supremacy that white supremacy and Christianity has become synonymous for a very large set of white Christians.
Yeah. And
that has to be re-educated. We have to uncover that. We have to teach it. We have to let people see how the white supremacist ideology has infiltrated into our churches. And that's what Pastor Davis was saying, and infiltrated into our theology, has affected what we teach, has affected what we think, and has affected how we see ourselves. So as an educator, my mantra is we must then unlearn this stuff. We must educate our Black community, our Black masses, so they understood that they don't see this kind of veil, like what Quadri was saying about, I want to separate my Blackness from my Christianity, because that's why they have this terminology which people say the white man's religion, because of that. And so it's like, I don't want to associate myself with Christianity as a Black conscious person, but we have to understand that Christianity was co-opted by white supremacy. But once again, the authentic message and the gospel of Jesus Christ is that for the oppressed.
Yes.
So we have to reconnect that for the Black masses. And that's what I'm trying. That's what I said. That's my thing. We got to reconnect that so they understand that your situation, your circumstance as Blackness is rooted and grounded in Christianity, and that it can be, you can get the freedom that's necessary in the word of God through justice that is given to us through the teachings of Jesus Christ. That authenticity has to be reclaimed, has to be taken back from what white supremacists have done. That's really why I wanted to revisit that.
Yeah, that's good. And it reminds me of something that you say, that you told me a lot when you were growing up, Frank. You grew up in an area where you can tell, the story about how you saw whites growing up because you grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood in terms of faith. Would you like to share that with the people? Because it does remind me of what Tandra was saying about the majority of the white supremacists identify as some form of Christian. And that's how you saw them. You didn't see them as a part of faith, more or less. I mean, I might be getting that a little bit wrong.
Well, as I've shared with you in the past, because I grew up in such close proximity with white folks, and I saw the way that they behaved and the way that they even treated their own parents and their own folks. It often, and they would come right out of mass, or what they call church, and they just come right home cussing their parents out, cussing each other out, acting ugly and all kinds of stuff. And it really caused me to doubt the sincerity of what they said that they believed. Easter was nothing but new sneakers to them, it seemed to me. Now, I can't judge what's in another man's heart or another person's heart, but that was what it was difficult for me growing up to see white folks as being sincere about the Jesus that I was learning about in Sunday school, the Jesus that like you said, Tandra, stood, delivered the captives and stood with the oppressed. I didn't see any of that, growing up, being promoted amongst my white counterparts. But what I will say is this, to speak to that point that you made about the vast majority of racists also identify as Christians. White supremacy, we have to understand, and as you said, it was Christianity was co-opted, but it was created in a way that they needed to reinforce or instate white supremacy in order to justify the murderous, genocidal theft that they were about to commit. And so you had those papal bullas. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but you had it was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And the Pope wrote out a papal bulla, is what they called it, saying that anywhere a quote unquote Christian goes, which meant a white person, and they found any savages, quote unquote, it was fine for them to either kill or enslave and take their land, because they could not possibly put it to the right purpose because they were not quote unquote Christians. And so that white supremacy, that racism, is baked into that thinking. So it would stand to reason that more white people that identify themselves as Christians would also be racist. And so it reminds me of something somebody said about Trump. If you vote for Trump, you may not be a racist, but you sure don't mind the racism.
That's right. That's right.
And so, because when you have a man that responds to people walking through the streets with tiki torches saying the Jews will not replace us, and eventually runs a person down, murdering them, and then you say there were very fine people on both sides, when the people on that side were Nazis and white supremacists, you look around, because your racism is showing up under that orange makeup.
He's never tried to hide it. He's never tried to hide it.
Well, right. And so we understand that these 70 million people voted with their eyes wide open. He might have pulled the wool over your eyes the first time, but if you went back out there after these 4 years of this mess and you voted for him, then what does that say about you? But here's where I believe we can take hope. 70 million of them ran out there allegedly and voted for this man in this orange makeup yet again. But guess what? When it comes to them, they vote. They know the power of voting, right? Because they voted, and they've tried to keep us from voting for 200 years. And so they're eligible voters, they actually turn up, right, and turn out. But here's the thing. We are historically, we do not vote in the numbers that we should. People say it's a 50-50 country. No, that's wrong, because only half the eligible voters vote. So if they got 70 million of theirs, and that's their high water mark, guess what? They still got whooped.
Yeah.
They still got whooped. And so I take hope in that even though they brought out 70 million, whatever number it was, there were 81 million that came out in opposition to that. And so we can take hope in that.
I'm sorry. Yes. It's okay. Let me see if I can. There are a lot of comments over here that I got to get back to. Quadri has answered, and I'm going to share that with you all. When I speak about the 70+ million, talking about remember them, don't forget them, I'm talking about because they are angry. First of all, their master has called them to meet him in DC next week. This is the kind of stuff that Black people cannot go to sleep around. I brought up the Karen downtown so that we can remember that they're not so far away. They're not in the southern states. They're not in the back hills. They are working right next to us You know, they are going in and out of stores when you and I go in and out of stores. Look at what happened to Nashville. And unless it happened since we've been on this call, I don't think 45 has said anything about the Nashville bomber on Christmas Day of all days, right? You know, and this person is also, he was his own victim. He was a suicide bomber, and somebody put on Twitter, if he had been a Muslim, they would be calling him exactly what he is, a terrorist. But that's not being said about this man. But let me go back over here to what Quadri was trying to say. And I agree. I'm reading a book. I'm rereading a book that my husband had from some years ago. It's called Jesus Before Christianity. And I really think that those are along the line. That's along the lines of what Quadri is trying to say. But he is saying, let me put this up there for everybody. Biblical Jesus equals justice. That's what Quadri said. But he also goes on to say, biblical Jesus does not equal a Christian. And he goes on to say, and I'm putting all of his comments because the whole discussion started around his question. What he says is, I think what I'm suggesting is placing the focus on our Blackness as a priority instead of an emphasis on formal doctrines. You all get that from him? Do you understand? And I think that there's a nuanced way that we can satisfy also what you're saying, Tandra. But this is what he's saying. I want to hear from you guys. He says, I think biblical Jesus sets a precedent for that.
What I would say,
anybody and everybody. And we are over the hour, so y'all keep hanging out because we're not done yet, right?
Right. I would, Brother Tony, I'm sorry. What I would say to that is Brother Quadri, I understand where you're coming from, and I understand what you're saying, because, and Sister Tandra, I also agree with you as well, because we have to re-understand and teach the understanding of the biblical Jesus and what the biblical Jesus was talking about and what he was promoting. And we can't forget, though, that there's so many, Christianity has come under such attack, and rightfully so, because of the failures that have happened, not only in our communities, but the way in which Christianity has been expressed throughout the world in terms of promoting white supremacy, to the point where we have a whole generation of young people who see Christianity and being a Christian as anathema to their own life's goals or you know, and what have you. So we have to go out there and get them as well. And sometimes, and so if we can relate to them on a level where we say, we see you and we understand that we have a common purpose, and say, but now here's how I'm gonna try and work toward, you know, your freedom is from a biblical or Christian perspective. You know, then maybe we can catch them and bring them in to the point, at least, where if they understand what Jesus was actually about, then maybe they won't be so reticent to join a movement that has a Christian at the head of it. You know, because there's just so many of them that are out there now who won't ever go into church because they believe the church has failed them. And so if we can just tell them, you know, I'm looking at you, I see you, I see me when I see you. I want you to understand that I'm with you. You know, then maybe we can bring them along as well.
Who's next?
Got next. I think what Kadri said in terms of, he talks about Blackness as opposed to our formal doctrines. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what he's saying. And to a large extent, I could agree with that. And I think I had posted something on Facebook again in the aftermath again of Ravi Zacharias' passing and the recent news about him. The article was, the church needs prophets, right? But it wants lawyers, right? Mm. What that means is we get to a place where we want lawyers, we want to defend our doctrinal positions or our theological positions, right? And we were taught that from a white supremacist point of view, that it's in these tenets, it's in these particular, again, these doctrinal positions. We elevate those things above the things that matter in terms of the everyday living, right? We're talking about justice is the key word, right? And Carrie made it clear that Jesus equals justice. But if we emphasize our formal doctrines, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have doctrine, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a point of view theologically. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that one thing that transcends, or the thing that is the thread that should align us all together, is that pursuit of justice, the kind of justice that Jesus is talking about, and the kind of justice that we find taught in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. Like one thread that we should be able to, the whole idea of treating your neighbor as you would yourself, that's one central theme that should trump everything. And I think that's what Tandra is saying about what Christianity is that type of emphasis. So I understand that point too, right? But I think what happens is that we become so doctrinally oriented or so systematized in our theology that we become so boxed in that we become now divided. And I've come from that background. I've come from a Pentecostal apostolic background where we have the truth and this is it, and we don't deal with anybody else. Right? So things happen in our community. We don't engage it because we are in our theological bubble. My dog is barking, but we are in our bubble, right? And we're doing our thing, so we don't become community oriented, where we need to be able to put that aside, right? Whatever your position is, and be able to, for the greater good, for the pursuit of justice, be able to lock arm in arm with others in the name of Jesus to pursue, again, what's in the best interest of our community. That's what being a Christian is all about.
Right. I would say, Brother Anthony, also, and this will be the last thing I would say, we have to be careful not to let doctrine drift into dogma.
Yeah.
Our doctrines are fine. Our doctrines are sound if we are following the biblical Jesus, as Sister Tandra said. If we study and we follow and we are disciples of Jesus, then our doctrine will be sound.
That's the best way to put it. Yeah,
you're right. We let our doctrine fall into and run into dogma, and once that happens, our eyes are closed. We are blinded, and we can't seek anyone else. We can't find any common ground with anyone, even though we are all in the same position.
Right.
I've used on this show several times the example of Black Panther, the movie, the four different tribes, and Winston's tribe, the mountain people, right? They didn't really take anything to do with T'Challa and all of them. They stayed up in the mountains. They practiced their old ways. But at that critical time, they did get in that room. They did come down out of the mountains, and they helped them to save Wakanda. I'm just suggesting that as Black people, we should be able to do the same. We really need to start unpeeling the onion that we keep touching on and referring to as having been bastardized by white supremacy. And if we just took the holy book and just began from that, what's recorded, then we'll see within it there are doctrines that we should be following rather than the ones that we have allowed ourselves to be boxed into from large denominations. As you were just saying, you were raised holiness and Pentecostal. I'm Baptist. We were raised Baptist. But at what point do we start to separate ourselves from some of those things that are really quite harmful, really, really quite harmful, not only to people in the pews, but also to the clergy, and say, you know what, we have really bigger issues that are common to not just people who decide they want to be a part of a faith tradition or in a church, everybody who's Black, I need to be concerned about sharing that same biblical Jesus with. Can we just get away from some of the practices that we have? Like, for instance, if I can only wear a dress, or if I can't wear pants, and that means I can't be served by this biblical Jesus that you're pushing, I am going to find somewhere else to express the soul's desire for faith. I'm going to find someplace else because you're making it much too difficult. So if we start with some of the basics, then we'd be putting ourselves in a position to bring some of our own people who have said that this is a white man's religion, when I truly believe that this Bible was meant for us. Can we start teaching that? Can we agree upon the things that align our beliefs about the Bible to the biblical Jesus, the Jesus before Christianity, and see what's left once we look at Jesus before Christianity? What's left without taking a torch to what actually people have set up as an idol, and that is a part of the grapple, the tension that exists within our faithful. We're the most faith-loving people, at least in the United States, but perhaps in the world. Black people, whatever that faith is us. We can't allow our faith to be so diluted by white supremacy, which it has. We are that generation. We are those, we are the, what is that, the expression on the t-shirts? Our ancestors' wildest dreams, because we are awakening. We are at a critical crucible. Is that the right word?
Precipice.
Precipice.
What is it?
Precipice.
Of revolution in our Blackness and in our faith. But we should not feel that everything has to go out the window if we go right back to the Word of God. Can we just go back to the Word of God, and find our true selves within the Word of God, and then share that biblical Jesus, that justice-seeking Jesus, the one who came to earth because of injustice and was ready to fight the fight for justice? Can we share that with the people before we share our denominations, before we share the names of our churches, before we share how large our congregations are? Can we do the things that the people of God really truly need? I mean, you said that commercial, Frank, which is interesting to me, that the devil is being compared to 2020. Well, I would like to suggest that there's less to do with all that has happened in 2020 with the devil and more to do with God. God is trying to wake up people up. God is trying to get us to actually come back to him. God is trying to help us open our eyes and reclaim the true God, and I think to a certain degree, some of us have, and in another degree, we haven't, and we still have a long way to go, but it's just something that I'm committed to continuing to do, and hopefully with you all. Tandra, I know you haven't spoken in a while. I'm going to let you speak, and then can I make this announcement? Even though we're still planning to do what we're going to do, so go ahead. We're up 118, and that's good.
I think actually the announcement even kind of segues into what I'm sharing, but I want to just reiterate what Brother Frank mentioned about the differentiation between doctrine and dogma. And even when you mentioned the example of, being shunned because of where you dress, and wearing the long dress, or how, you're supposed to be, that's the dogma. Those are the types of things that we need to shed. The doctrine, the teachings of Jesus Christ. And that's why I was not opposed to the word Christianity, because for me, Christianity means the teaching of Jesus Christ. Christendom for me means the organizational structure regarding religions. That's different. Okay. That's why. So that's why I push back on the term, saying, let's go about Christianity. Christianity basically for me is the teachings of Jesus Christ, the doctrine. So I'm okay with that. Christendom is the kingdom, the organizational structures that were created by man. Christianity is the teachings. Christendom is organizational structure. So that's why I was a little bit, in terms of the terminology, that was just for me personally, how I saw it. That I understand where people are coming from. That's what it meant for me. So I believe that the teachings of Jesus Christ, that's what I was saying in terms of, I agree with Brother Frank, is that we have to recognize that the doctrines are sound. What in terms of what the teachings are, it is that when those teachings have been co-opted by religion, by people's ideas, or people's desires for, power, desires for control, when those things have putting people in, those dynamics where they have to be controlled, those things have distorted the teachings of Jesus Christ. And one of the major factors that have distorted them, as we're talking about, is white supremacy. And one thing that was helpful for me was one thing that one of the elders in my church when I was growing up used to say, and it always kept me grounded: you only die for the gospel. He would say, you only die for the gospel. If it comes time when they say, what are you going to live or die for? I'm not living and dying for whether or not to wear a dress to the ground. I'm not living and dying for, dogma. I'm the one, if they ever come and say, what are you going to die for? I'm only going to die for the gospel. And that the gospel is the uniting factor, the authenticity of Jesus Christ, the authenticity of Jesus' message. And that's why I said I don't want it to get, that to be lost, and that the authenticity of the biblical Jesus is the cornerstone of justice. So we don't have to deny our Blackness in representing Jesus. That's really what I want. And that's part of what, and going to the next step of teaching, that's the message that for me in teaching, is having people to understand who the biblical Jesus is before Christianity, of the organization of Christendom, and how the structure was created, understanding the historical evolution of how the message of Jesus was changed and was distorted and manipulated. And once people's eyes are open, then they can say, they can come behind and rally behind the desire for justice, and see that what has happened with your Christianity is not so much that it's a white man's religion, but that it is something that has been manipulated. And I think that's important for us to understand the differences between those, and understanding that we only die for the gospel.
Yeah, I like that.
We only die for the gospel.
I like that. You guys, you all have been excellent. And I love all of the feedback from the community that has supported Black Talk platform for all these months. We're so excited. And I could not think of a finer panel of guests to have with me tonight than my sister Tandra, my husband Frank, and my friend Tony. I have a hard time. He knows. I never text him, hey Tony, hey Anthony. I never do that. It's like, hey Pastor, how you doing? Pastor. And I guess in some places you want to be, like I always say, Debbie, or no, I'm not Debbie to anyone other than my family, but definitely Deb, or without the handles. But we are doing something exciting. We are joining forces. We're all seminary educated, and we appreciate and are grateful for what God has allowed us to gain in terms of our education, whether it's seminary or an Ivy League setting, like our historian here, Tandra, or higher education. I think Pastor Frank went to Ivy League too. But those things matter not if our people are still divided. And we have taken all of our collective years of education, and we are saying that so much of it is laced with white supremacy, that we are grateful to God for giving us eyes to see how white supremacy has even impacted our way of preaching and teaching, and unwittingly, until he actually took the scales off of our eyes to show us how we can stay true to even what Tandra just said, because we go back and forth and we have about Christianity versus Christendom, because on your show in the summer, I had the reverse. So I'm like, okay, I hear her explaining it. And that's the thing, that's what's so important, that we don't get mad and take our ball and go home, that we keep working this thing out so that we can get to a place, even if it's not of agreement, but mutual respect, and able to leave that setting without scratching our heads saying, I thought that was my girl, but she is just way out there. No, now I understand from a different viewpoint. And to that end, we are starting, hopefully in February, the new academy. The new academy. What is the new academy, you ask? Well, I'm so happy you asked. The new academy mixes the scholarship and practice, which we are all akin to doing. Pastor David started out the year talking about how he's just longing to raise up young evangelists and pastors and preachers and teachers. And for me, I have been like having a steady diet of Galatians, not getting weary in well doing, because of the things that we've just discussed and what we've been discussing all summer. Even as it relates to how we do church, how we see church. But what we are planning to do is to offer courses, low cost courses, because we spent the entire summer trying to pique your interest in coming outside of the box. And the new academy will offer courses of discussion around some of the subjects that we have tackled throughout the summer. We are scholars. We don't run from that, but we are practicing scholars. So we don't take anything away from those who are strictly scholars, who are pushing out information for us to research and to digest and to review. But we just happen to be both. We are scholars who practice what we've researched, what we have theorized, and what we are now putting into practice. And we really want to raise up others to do the same, so that, unfortunately, when the next George Floyd happens, we will be so visible in these fights, and we will begin to do, as Tandra said, re-strategize our approach. Because if we continue to do things in the very same way we've been doing them for the last 50 to 60 years, and not getting a lot of progress. And even as we close out this year, the question is being asked, what did we actually get from all the protests during the summer? And that is something that we want to see change. We want to be able to give the benefit of our collective knowledge and practice to others who in their towns, who in their states, all throughout this country, and even internationally, because it is happening all over the world, not just here. We want to be able to give you tools. We want to invite you into a virtual big space where we could just put it all out there in the middle, but agreeing to not leave angry with each other to the point where we can no longer come back together to reason the word together. And so we're going into the lab. We're going to put our courses together. We, in fact, have already started putting our courses together. We're going to offer them, and we are hopeful that some of you will take the journey with us so that we can prepare. And as we prepare you, you will go and prepare another, because that is how you build the village. You don't just get it and keep it to yourself. That's why we've been giving all of this knowledge away all summer, because we saw it as critically important. And we hope that you will take the journey with us. Please watch this space. Black Talk Platform is taking a vacation until January 19th. We'll be back on the 19th, and I'll probably bring all of us back together, because by then we will have been able to put it together and be able to fully announce it to you, start dates and all of that, registration and everything. So if you all are available, please come back to be my guest on January 17th, where we will all collectively announce the new academy and how people can take part in it. And we're starting in February because that is the month, the little bitty month that they have told us is when everything Black happens. But we know that everything Black happens 365 days of the year. And so we embrace that. But I do thank you, Tandra. I thank you, Pastor Davis, and I thank you, Frank, for staying with me for an hour and 29 seconds and 29 minutes and 18 seconds. Do you all have any parting words, or was that good enough?
That was good enough for me. That was good. Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
You're good. You're good. Quadri, we're gonna get you in here because he's still asking questions and people trying to leave. Quadri, we trying to go home now. Yes, we're already home, but we're trying to end this show. But he's right, and I do want to at some point bring him into the discussion again because, you know, he's young and I love his way of thinking. I really do. He pushes that needle, and I appreciate that needle being pushed, Quadri. So with that said, listen, everybody be safe out there. Have a wonderful bringing in of the new year. Bless you and all of your family. I'll see my guests in the green room. God bless you all, and thank you for being here. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.